Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about how to write the inverse and the contrapositive to a conditional statement. So if you haven't watched the video on conditional statements, I highly recommend going back and watching that one before watching this one. If you watched it already, then you're good to go and let's get started. So a few terms before we actually begin to write an inverse and a contrapositive. Okay. The first one we want to talk about is, we already learned what a conditional was in the last video. It's a if P then Q statement, where P is the hypothesis and Q is the conclusion. What a converse is the converse reverses the hypothesis and the conclusion of that conditional. So essentially, it reverses the way it's written. So let me show you what that actually looks like. Here we have a conditional statement saying if the sum of the interior angle measures of a polygon is 180. So this would be my P statement. Then the polygon is a triangle. That's my conditional, so that's my whole conditional, but the part that says then the polygon is a triangle would be my conclusion. So the converse of a conditional statement will reverse the order of these. So instead I would have, first, if a polygon is a triangle, then I would write my hypothesis. Then the sum of the interior angle measures is 180. So that's what switching it up would do. That's what the converse is. The converse essentially puts the conclusion before the hypothesis. Now let's talk about what a negation is. Okay. The negation of a statement has the opposite meaning of the original statement. So what that means is, let's say I want to negate P. And the way we denote that is like this. We write a little squiggly line, and that means the negation of P, and write down the opposite of P. So in this case, that would be if I write down the negation, we write the opposite of what the original statement is, which would be if the sum, of the interior angle measures of a polygon, and instead of saying is 180, we would actually say is not 180. This is what a negation does. A negation will take whatever the statement originally said and say the opposite of it. So instead of saying it was 180, the negation of P would say that it is not 180. Now that we've covered these two, the converse is switching it. The inverse is saying the opposite of what the original said. Our inverse, what the inverse does is it'll negate both your hypothesis and your conclusion. So it would say, instead of our original P, the way we would write this, it would say, okay, the negation of P to the negation of Q. So the opposite of P to the opposite of Q. What I would actually end up having now, the inverse of this conditional would look like this. Instead of saying that the sum, instead of saying the interior angle measures of a polygon, instead of saying is 180, I would say is not 180. Okay. So if the sum of the interior angle measures of a polygon is not 180, then I would begin my conclusion. I would say then the polygon is not. So again, we would negate the conclusion by also saying is not a triangle. And this would be an example of what an inverse to a conditional is. This is the inverse of a conditional. Basically, we take the hypothesis and the conclusion and we say the opposite of what they originally said. Now, what a contrapositive is, here's what a contrapositive would be the same as if I were to reverse these two statements. So I would reverse these two in the contrapositive. I would then say if the polygon is not a triangle, then the sum is not 180 degrees. So that's what a contrapositive is. A contrapositive would reverse these two words, and I would then have if the polygon is not a triangle, then the sum of the interior angle measures of a polygon is not 180 degrees. So that's an example of what an inverse and a contrapositive is. Again, this last one would go before this, and we would actually have the inverse of Q, then the inverse of P, or the negation, sorry, of each. So let's go ahead and let's practice doing this for a couple other ones. We're going to go ahead and we're going to write the inverse and the contrapositive to another statement. So let's say we have this statement. If an angle measures 100 degrees, then it is obtuse. So first let's begin by writing the converse of this conditional. The converse would say, again here I'm going to go highlight, this is my hypothesis, this is my conclusion. So the converse, if I go back, let's say you forget, the converse is just switching Q and P. So I would just switch these two, Q and P. Instead of saying P then Q, our converse is Q then P. So I'm going to go ahead and say if an angle is obtuse, then it measures 100 degrees. Okay, so we went ahead and switched our conclusion. Oh, sorry, I forgot an N on then. And our hypothesis. Okay? So then it measures 100 degrees. So this would be the converse. So this is an example of the converse. Now let's go ahead and let's do the contrapositive. Again, our contrapositive is the negation of Q with the negation of P. So it follows the same order as the converse, but now we're going to say the opposite. Just realized I spelled obtuse wrong, sorry. So we're going to have the opposite of Q, then the opposite of P. So the opposite of our conclusion leading to the opposite of our hypothesis. So if an angle is not obtuse, so this is how we negate it, then we can say does not measure 100 degrees. So again, here is our conclusion, our original conclusion, or the negation of our original conclusion, and the negation of our original hypothesis. Now if we want, we can also write the inverse. So here I'll have the inverse. And if we remember, the inverse states that it is the negation of P to the negation of Q. So we are now going to write essentially the opposite of the contrapositive. So now I'm going to say the angle, if the angle is not 100 degrees, then it is not obtuse. Okay, so this would be my original hypothesis, the negation of it, and the negation of our original conclusion. Okay, so I've hoped this video on inverse and contrapositives has helped. Some of you might need to just rewatch this video real quick, pause and play accordingly. You know, go at your own pace, don't feel rushed. Again, if you didn't watch the video on conditionals, I highly recommend you going back and watching that. And if you feel comfortable with this material, I'd actually like you to check out the next video on biconditionals. Alright, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.